Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome back to the next video installment of our series taking a look at a Reddit post that asks the question, why hasn't one-page rules taken over the wargaming world? The first two installments here were pretty popular and well received, and there were some interesting arguments made, and there's still plenty more. It is a very, very long Reddit thread. So we'll just keep going through these in about 15-20 minute installments until the arguments start getting repeated and a little overused, or until the ad hominem attacks start getting incredibly serious. But for now, it's still looking like the discussion has a lot to offer. So let's jump back in and see what some additional comments are from different folks around the internet about what they like about one-page rules, what could be changed to improve one-page rules, and basically how it stacks up to the other games that are available. So let's jump in. So when we left off the last video, we looked at a sizable response by one of the participators here in this discussion. In fact, I think their post was almost the entire video. And here we have a response that's praising it, saying this is probably the most accurate description I've seen in a long time. But they do bring up a point here that at the end of the day, the fan base drives the business model. And despite the meteoric rise of OPR over the last several years, it is still many, many years from ever being a threat to Warhammer. And I would agree with that assessment. It is super popular, but it is nowhere near the scale of IP or popularity that Warhammer is. Even just Warhammer 40k, if we leave out all the other elements of GW like Age of Sigmar and Old World and their skirmish games, and just compare Grimdark Future to Warhammer 40k, you look at the video game spin-offs, you look at the shows, the cartoons, the motion pictures, you look at all of the merchandise, everything. OPR has a very, very long way to go. But what would be more interesting to look at is to see, well, where was Warhammer so many years after its creation? Where was it so many years, how many players, that kind of thing, within a certain time period, and take a look and see how OPR has compared. But let's keep going here. So his next statement, he says, personally, I've been following OPR since the days when their games were called one-page 40k. Yeah, and GW put a stop to that really fast. The rules, while having experienced many enhancements over the years, are still nowhere near as flavorful as 40k, despite the current state of 40k at large, in my opinion. Obviously, OPR is designed as a streamlined system, and that's the majority of the appeal, but still. And then they're talking about how they were a Patreon supporter, so they have put money into one-page rules. Now, that comment of flavorful, there's a lot that could be involved in there. If they're talking about the rules being streamlined and a more complex rule system is more flavorful, not necessarily. If they're talking about lore, backstory, characters, world building, yeah, absolutely. And when I did my video series comparing one-page rules in 40k way back when I started this channel, that was one thing I definitely gave to Games Workshop, is they have a world that their game is set in, and that world now has taken on a life of its own. Whereas one-page rules, one of the things it struggles with is it has borrowed that world, and it's very difficult to try and create your own world when it quite clearly is a knockoff of somebody else's. So it's going to be hard for one-page rules to grow and to really explode on its own when it's living off borrowed lore. And the attempts so far to try and create their own lore have been they've been okay. I wasn't totally blown away by the Grimdark Future world book. I haven't started the Age of Fantasy world book, and I've only looked briefly through the Vampiric Undead world book. So, to be honest, I haven't probably given OPR lore as much attention as I would have liked. But the poster here does have a very valid point. All right, so let's move on here. Next comment says, excellent points. I think for OPR to really take off, they need to find a way to support the friendly local gaming business model in some way. Maybe they can grant commercial licenses with My Mini Factory so that any local gaming stores with a 3D printer can sell physical copies of the model, or put together special limited edition books which can only be bought in stores, because like you said, GW has a business model that began with physical products and stores. And I agree with that. GW, of course, started before 3D printing, before STLs, whereas OPR is taking advantage. And I think that's part of the reason OPR has done so well, is it hasn't had to worry about the massive startup costs of mass producing models, shipping them all over the world, having to worry about overstock, people not buying product. Instead, they pay the artist to develop the model, they put it on My Mini Factory, and then the rest, after they've paid off that initial artist, the rest is all gravy. And of course, as he mentions here, books and physical models, OPR is creating those, but not physical. I mean, Broken Truth is a physical mini box, but physical books, usually you buy those directly from OPR through Drive-Thru RPG or something like that. So they're making many of the same points here. Now, in response to that, this viewer says, or this reader says, I've thought about this as well. How does OPR eventually integrate into the local gaming store distribution? I've toured with the idea of stores having like an iPad or kiosk that players can order direct from online distributors like My Mini Factory. Maybe MMF OPR can have some kind of deal where it's cheaper to purchase in store for consumers to make it worthwhile for the stores. I just don't know how you get past the dopamine hit of walking out of a store with a new physical box. That's a key driver of the quote-unquote plastic rack. It's all speculation on my part anyways, as I doubt the creators of OPR would listen to me. Well, you never know. I mean, OPR, as we have seen, does indeed listen to its players a heck of a lot more than GW does. GW definitely listens to the competitive scene, but they have so many players, they're not going to listen to every single one of them. We can't expect them to. Now, this idea of setting up kiosks and starting to have people place 3D printing orders in store, that was mentioned previously. There's the problem of who wants to play in a video game store that has a resin factory in the back. The smell would be awful unless you have some really good ventilation. And then the other problem is by ordering online, the store doesn't get much. Like you mentioned here, some kind of deal between My Mini Factory and One Page Rules, but having to make those individual agreements with every single local gaming store, because if you think of it, there is no local gaming store chain for something like this. Hobbytown USA they have a table once in a while for tabletop games like this, but for the most part, there's not a single chain of friendly local gaming stores. They're all, one-stop shops, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like mom and pop. There's one of them, and no franchises. So it is possible that one day this is how you will get a lot of your models. Maybe as 3D printing gets faster and more quality, maybe we'll get to the day where you can walk into a store, place an order, look around the store for an hour, and then your models are done. Like maybe they can get that fast, but we're not there yet. So again, we're seeing this repeating of people like to have things physical, and they're absolutely right. So he mentions there's just something, you do get that dopamine hit of buying something in the store and walking out thinking, I get to go home and open this and build this and eventually paint and play with it. And since the whole world of OPR is digital right now, you don't have that. I mean, it doesn't give you the same rush to purchase an STL as it does to purchase a box of models. Okay. So the next comment here takes some issue with that. While I don't disagree, I do have a point. OPR does support friendly local gaming stores. How? All those GW models, they work fine with OPR rules. Some players don't mind the model cost, and for them OPR still has big benefits. The biggest being this: you only have to buy a new model if you think it's cool, not because of codex creep to sell new models. Yes, the rules are good. Yes, the community's good. Yes, you can use all sorts of cool OPR-themed STLs and print your own. However, for a lot of my friends, not having rules tied to models and marketing, that's the biggest draw. The rest is just bonus. Now that's interesting because some of the other posters said here that what drew them to one-page rules was the simplicity of it. They got tired of needing a big rule book, a codex, supplements, PDF updates, all that stuff just to be able to play with their minis. Whereas this gentleman says that what drew them to it was being able to play a game where they weren't constricted. If they wanted to put a tank on the field, they didn't have to use the model created by a specific company. They could put anything. So rule of cool takes over. Now, I've had this discussion actually with the owners of Waterloo Games, the folks who you see at the beginning of every one of my videos, about this idea of, does OPR really have a presence in the store? And it's kind of like what's the word? It's not a spectrum, it's an on-off switch. On the one hand, you could say OPR has no presence because they don't have any of their physical models, or OPR has absolute presence because you can play every model in the store. But that's a weaker argument, I think, because when you look at a box of models, it doesn't have One Page Rules logo on it. Yes, you can buy bolt action stuff, you can buy Frostgrave, you can buy 40K stuff, you can buy Marvel Cinematic Universe, you can buy, or Crisis Protocol, you can buy any models and use them in OPR. That's true. But if people don't know that, then they can't do that. Once you're in OPR, then you realize everything is open. But if someone walks into a gaming store, and having worked at a gaming store previously, and also just being in gaming stores a lot, it happens that people walk into a store having no idea what's going on inside, but being curious because they see figures in the windows, they see the cardboard cutouts and the posters from the street view, but they walk in and what they see in the store, that's their first introduction. And if they never see a box with the OPR logo on it, they never know about the game. So absolutely, One Page Rules needs to get something on shelves, because otherwise it's only once you're already kind of in things that you find it, or when you're online you might stumble across it. But nobody, almost nobody, will go into a gaming store and learn about it just by walking around, because there's nothing that's going to tell them. So good point. All right, let's move on here. Okay, Corgi says, this is me. I buy mostly GW models, as I like the lore, universe, and models, especially the Space Marines. I'm not a fan of the cost, which is why I buy secondhand when possible. But GW easily has some of the best models, and as most are plastic, easier to kit bash compared to resin. Space Marines are what got me into the 40K universe, and until OPR releases official Battle Brother files, I will continue to use GW minis. Okay, he's actually made a couple comments in here that are worth looking at. So the idea that GW has a great lore, universe, and models. You can look back through all of the videos that I have made, and while I criticize and complain a lot about the things Games Workshop does, I love the world they've created, and I love their models. Like this guy. It's quality stuff. It's still too expensive, but you'll never look at a GW model and say, my goodness, this did not have a lot of effort. And occasionally they have flubs on design, but even the flubs still are very detailed, very high quality. It's more aesthetic. But this idea here that until there's something that can replace 40K, for example, OPR has never released Battle Brother files, and I think they're very hesitant to, because as this guy points out, he has Space Marines. Everybody has Space Marines. I mean, when GW used to do that yearly survey, the results showed that over half of all 40K players have a Space Marine army. And so why would you want to buy another army Space Marine themed just so you can get the OPR models? Some will. But I got to tell you, I have a ton of Necron models, and so while I think I will buy into Broken Truth, I'm more doing it to get the Saurian Star Host, and I'm looking at those Robot Legion going, what am I going to do with them? Because I already have those. Will I integrate them with my existing models? Will I maybe split it with a friend? But I don't know if OPR is going to release Battle Brothers anytime soon, because there's not as big of a market for it, since there's so many Space Marines out there. The other thing he mentions, that the plastic are easier to kit bash compared to resin. And it will be interesting to see how the reception of Broken Truth is, because rather than build the models, they're plastic, but they're pre-done. You can't kit bash anything unless you really want to start sawing away at models and green stuffing your way out of it. And I don't imagine too many people really want to do that. It's one thing to kit bash from a sprue. It's another thing to take an already finished model and start messing with it. So I think good points there. Now, there's a couple more hidden replies here. Let's see if they're what they got to say here. The first one, friendly local gaming stores are not going to want to be dealing with 3D printing models as a general rule. Not even a question of price sales, just dealing with the toxic chemicals in a store environment. They might be able to go the privateer press approach and manufacture their own models and ship them to stores, but it's not like that worked for Privateer Press anyways. Yeah, I do recall reading that when Privateer Press released their newest edition of War Mahords, that they were going to 3D print everything. And I haven't seen any War Machines in my current store, but that does not mean that they're not being played anywhere. But he brings up a good point. That business model of trying to print on demand, you've got the time problem, you've got the stink problem. And that's gonna hold you back. Whereas you go into a GW store and you can just grab it off the shelf and go. So I think the more one-page rules actually starts producing more of these boxed models, I think they will see their image, their brand really start to grow from there. And then another reply here. Very well said. I can see you understand business and think this write-up is a very, very good explanation. Now, I think he's responding to the original one. I am a store owner. Not games, but home decor items. And stores, even though we are struggling in the ever-changing world of e-commerce, are still a touch point for a lot of customers. There is still something, and I think always will be, on the physical presence and a friendly face to talk to. But stores need to see what's in it for them to justify the time and shelf space. Why would a store owner ever support or recommend a model that detracts from his own viability? Unless a store had a clubhouse, co-op, pay for space business model, which I think is the future, but I have not seen a viable model yet. No business is going to promote the game or encourage its play on their tables in their store unless they make a business model out of printing the models for clients. There was a similar discussion like this actually at Waterloo. Since one-page rules is based on 3D printed files, there was a concern, though, that if you're 3D printing from someone else, you're not buying the models in the store. So rather than buy something off the shelf, folks will come into Waterloo with 3D printed models they made at home or bought from Etsy or got somewhere else, use the store table space, but never buy anything in the store. So that is a legitimate business concern here. But imagine if you have, and I hope they do this with their box set with Broken Truth, they have these models and then they say, if you would like more, you can now go to my mini factory and buy more. So again, we're seeing this discussion of there's the gaming side of the store, the production side of the store, of the business, I should say. Will there be a time when those two are fused together? And I'm not sure. What you might have is a gaming store that buys the spot next to it, and rather than expand into it for more tables, they set up a printing farm there or something like that. But then there's the danger of, well, what do you print? Do you start printing stuff nobody's asking for and hope that they'll buy it? You can probably do that, maybe a little more easily with resin. I don't know what the profit margins are of plastic injection versus resin printing, but it looks like this is the big holdup. Okay, a couple other quick ones because we're almost at our 15-minute spot here. This next one, Warhammer has brand recognition. Well, that's kind of circular. They're more popular because they have a brand. Well, they have a brand because they're more popular. 10 years ago, no one had heard of OPR. Now it has, at this point, I'd imagine probably close to 15,000 Patreons. So that's pretty good. Now, this next one here looks a little bigger. Oh, let's just go through it. We're already here. So 40K specifically is the worst rule set by far. Well, in comparison to what and what edition? List building is more restrictive than OPR. The abilities are more boring than OPR, and yet somehow the actual gameplay is more complicated. I don't know if I totally agree with that. List building is more restrictive. You've got the formations, or you got the detachments in Warhammer, and you have the forced organization in OPR. The abilities are more boring? I don't know if I'd agree with that. I would rather say that the abilities in OPR are the ones that are a little cookie cutter. As I mentioned, going over the first batch of the 3.5 beta, you saw the same rules kind of used over and over. So I don't fully agree with him here. And then saying the gameplay is more complicated, absolutely. Now, moving on, he says, I really like both Kill Team and Warcry and wish OPR would steal from them. Well, have you played Firefight? Steal what? He says, I really like the old world and think the templates, extreme levels of customizations, huge numbers of very diverse spells, and all kinds of crazy abilities are charming. So he criticizes the rule set, but then says the things he wants OPR to pick up are the things that make 40K's rule sets a little crazy, is the detail. So I do agree with him that I have not found one-page rule skirmish games to kind of scratch my skirmish itch. To me, it just feels like playing a very small version of the full tabletop game. I can go into more of that in a different video, but I agree. I would like to see the Firefight games feel different than just playing on a smaller board with fewer models. Finishing him off here, even AOS, where I think AOF has the overall better rules, mostly suffers from the I go, you go, and is an enjoyable game that I will at times play. Can't stand 40K. There are no redeeming qualities from my perspective, and everyone seems to agree it's not good, and yet by far it's the most popular, or OT makes absolutely no sense. No redeeming qualities, that's kind of harsh. It can't, otherwise it wouldn't be as popular as if it really was completely hopeless, the game would have already died. And everyone seems to agree. Well, on this thread, sure. But we can head on over to the 40K subreddit and you'll find lots of people gushing. So a little too much hyperbole, I think, in this post. It has some good ideas, but taking it a little bit to the extreme here. So there you have it for this installment. It seems like there's still this question about the need for a physical presence, which Broken Truth will solve, but is it enough? Can it be improved? Can there be some way to combine the 3D printing elements of one-page rules with the storefront need to have a physical presence? Who knows? Let's see what other information folks have when we move on to the next version or the next episode of the video. But until then, thanks for tuning in, and make sure, above all else, you keep your dice on the table. I'll see you on the next one.